On today's episode, we are going to continue to dive deep into that identity piece. We wrapped up last week with part 1, and this is going to be part 2. So you can't just dive straight into this episode because it's going to start in the middle of us talking, and really go back, listen to that part 1 so you know what we are setting you up to understand and learn from what we're about to share. Dr. Glenn is going to dive deep into his own personal history. It is extremely vulnerable and raw, and how it has shown up for Phyllis. And we talk a lot about stunt doubling, and so how we can form ourselves so we can feel understood and so we can find a new sense of identity, which is not based on our authentic self and what that does in our relationships. So that is where we are going today. Please stay tuned all the way to the core emotion wheel at the end. Don't miss that. It is such a connecting core emotion wheel. And I think so many of our listeners are going to relate to what you hear. So welcome to the Connection Codes podcast. This is the podcast where we break open the emotions that take us from being disconnected to connected in our relationships and in ourselves. I am your host, Tierra Wages, and joining me today is marriage and family therapist, clinical sexologist, Dr. Glenn Hill, and his incredible wife, Phyllis Hill. And together, they have founded the Connection Codes, which is the guide to human connection. And we're so glad you're here.
If you've heard any of Glenn's story, his dad died when he was 8. And the trauma of that, the loss, because your mom, I think it was within 2 weeks that she realized there is no money now that dad was the income provider, and now that's gone. And so she, for the first time, had to leave the home and go work. And she was not prepared for that. And so she actually did several jobs. So you didn't just lose a dad, you also lost a mom. And your siblings were struggling with their own stuff for sure. And I'm not even saying they were kind to you before your dad died, but it was like things were really, really bad after your dad died and your mom was gone all the time. And that was such formative years, because Glenn and I met when I was 15 and he was 16. And for sure, those beginning many, many years, we did not understand what an effect that would have on an 8-year-old. I think it's the older we get, the more clear that even becomes. But the idea of these memories for you and these experiences for you that have for so long formed a belief system. Can you share any of those as far as where they came from and how you've had to really struggle to get a different sense of self?
Yeah. Well, I'm 62 years old, it's just the last few years that I've really begun recognizing. I remember, and this is quite a few years ago, but I remember the first time you ever referenced the trauma of my childhood, and we were presenting to a group when you did that. And I thought you were just being melodramatic or, embellishing something. And I asked you about it later, and I was like, I'm just curious why you use the word trauma. And we had never used that term before. And I'd certainly never used it because it didn't even exist in my personal universe. And you were just kind of bewildered that didn't make sense to me. And I remember saying to you, because you rattled off several things. I'm like, oh, no, those are just unfortunate events. And that was somewhere along the line whenever we were, I think it's a book and became a movie, the series of unfortunate events. And I used that phrase to you. I said, oh, well, it was just a series of unfortunate events. And I had no concept that, this actually has an effect on me. Well, I'll be darned. So again, I'm 62. I'm really just the last few years going, oh, shoot, that was big. And just for the record, I'm not mad at my parents. My dad died of a heart attack. He didn't plan that. My mother, was just trying to hold on for dear life. She was trying to keep the farm running, and then she realized the whole money thing. We got to have money. So she just was gone. Not because she was, what's that called? negligent, or what's it called when you
Abandonment.
Yeah, there's a word for it. Not abuse, but what's it called?
I would think negligent.
Is it that the word?
Yeah.
I just want to make sure that that's clear. I'm not saying that at all. She was just, and of course, she did not know that her husband was going to pass away and that she was going to be left in this scenario. So I don't fault my mother at all for that. But it was intense for all parties involved. And so I got lost in so many ways. I was 8 years old. My siblings were all experiencing what they were experiencing. And so it was really intense for a long time.
You've shared this before, but you broke your arm twice. And were both of those times before your dad died?
Yeah.
And you share that you did not tell your parents.
Right.
And I think about that as far as how that forms a memory and an experience for a little guy who's young, 5.
I was 5 years old the first time.
That you thought something had already formed in your life that said, when you're in extreme pain, do not share this with an adult. Do not share this with your parents or your siblings. You're not the oldest among your siblings. You're the 5th. Yeah. So you had siblings you could have told, you had parents you could have told, and you didn't tell them. So there was already something very clear in you that said, some kind of message. What would you give them message around that?
Yeah. Well, and I may have shared this before, I don't remember, but, and again, I'm not mad at my parents about it. I think they were doing the best that they knew, but I remember distinctly the phrase, you stop your crying or I'll give you something to cry about.
Yeah.
And I can remember even, my dad died when I was 8, so anything connected to him obviously is before that. And I can remember thinking, I'm not crying for fun. This isn't a hobby that I have. And I didn't say that. I probably wouldn't be here today if I had. But I didn't even understand what that message meant. You stop your crying or I'll give you something to cry about. I already have something to cry about. That's the reason I'm crying. Again, my parents just didn't grasp any of that. So I'd been given that message. I remember my grandparents saying to me very emphatically, children are to be seen and not heard. I know hearing my mother talk about her growing up, they were not allowed to speak at the dinner table. If they said one word, they were sent to their room and they didn't get to eat dinner. And again, I'm not even mad at my grandparents. I'm bewildered. I'm just like, wait, what? That's like a good thing. That's good parenting. And they thought that it was. So I'd gotten that message verbally, non-verbally, intentionally, unintentionally, very, very clearly, though, very emphatically, that you are not allowed to speak. You are not allowed to convey anything. And if you do, I'll give you something to cry about. So I'm 5. I have some memories of it, not a ton. I break my arm. Just shut up. You're not supposed to say it. It's 3 days before my mother realized, wait, he stopped using his right arm. And I'm right-handed. He's doing everything with his left arm. And then she figured out that there was a problem there. So that because you have a 5-year-old. Is he 5?
Yeah.
So this little 5-year-old, it gets hurt, gets wounded, is experiencing this pain. Of course, he doesn't tell mom and dad.
Yeah.
I mean, if that were to happen in your life, I would sit Wes and tear down. I'd say, okay, we got a problem here.
Right.
This little guy was injured and he didn't say a word to you for days.
Yeah.
What have you done?
Yeah.
And I wouldn't be mean to you, but I would be emphatic, like, this is not good.
Yeah.
This, it's just, it's so dysfunctional. It's amazing to me.
Well, and part of what I'm visualizing now is how, especially due to this movie, it's a strand, right? It becomes a part of your identity many, many, many years later. It was still a part of you that said very clearly a message, if not many different types of messages in this one experience. And of course, I've been with you a long time. I'm sitting here thinking, okay, how have I experienced this with you over the lifetime that we've been together? And I wonder if you could see any of it over the lifetime where you, in those moments when you're experiencing, cold or pain, or that you don't say anything, and that in it's the whole idea of I don't deserve to say anything. they'll figure it out. And I think I have in our marriage seen that play out where you have been in pain and you almost like, after 3 days, your mother figured it out. She handed you something specifically to make you pick it up or hold it in your right. And of course, you couldn't do it. And that's when she discovered something's wrong and she took you to the doctor. But I see about how that has affected our marriage in the sense that I think it's been so devastating to you. And, we often talk about how I can't read your mind. Like if you're in pain, you have to tell me, which is the power of the connection codes as far as in our story that I need you to tell me what is happening with you. It's not my job to figure it out. I cannot read your mind. But I get this sense of self. I get this where this started. I get this experience that you had as a child. And it was not just that one time. Matter of fact, you've shared with me, like even being left at school, not picked up. And, this was, if you're young, you can't even relate to this because schools don't function this way anymore. But you were left outside, all the staff left, all the teachers left, and you were there by yourself outside for hours in the cold. And you learned to go inside yourself and bring warmth to your body, which is such a scary psychological thing that you learn to do. But I even think about that experience, that memory that forms a strand. Because sometimes, we talk about psychological disorders and the spectrum and how in our childhood we're trying to survive. Like we are all this way, that we are kind of, what is the need to survive? I'm going to figure out how to survive. Yeah. And you put a lot of things into place, had to survive. But again, then I think, how does that play out in our marriage? How has that played out? And I've known you even in times where you don't have a warm jacket and you don't just say, I need to go buy a warm jacket. It's almost like if a warm jacket shows up, okay, I'll wear a warm jacket. Otherwise, it's okay. I'll just be cold.
Right.
And it's like, wait, what? Where did that come from? But then I hear these stories about your childhood and I go, okay, that became almost a core belief of yours, a part of your sense of self, a part of who you became, and it still is there. And, there's this, of course, stories that you've shared about how your brothers would reference you as an F up little brother. And that
Only my oldest brother.
If someone said that about us, we would be like, wait, what? Where you were so used to it, you didn't even flinch. And so you go, wow, that became a part of your sense of self, a part of your core belief. And it had a really long strand and it's there. And now, you have begun over the years to break all that down and to go, wait, I do have worth. I am not a mess up. I am, and to be able to go back though and process that. And I think that's the incredible power of the connection codes and understanding emotions, is to be able to go look at some of these things. And I know your children speak into your life a lot, and they're fascinated by your stories. And we've talked about one recently, and Echo was like, you got to talk about this on a podcast, just what your experience. You left home at 14, which even when you say that, for most of us, we're like, wait, what? You left home at 14? Where did you go? What did you do? And who did you live with? And, you share stories about living in your car and, living with different people who felt sorry for you and took you in. And I'd love to interview some of them. I don't know that we could find them at this point or if they're still even alive, but to go, what did you think of this little guy at 14? Like, how did you end up taking him in? But all of these experiences and memories form a lot of beliefs and a survival. Like there's such a survival that you've had and have defied so many odds to be who you are today. And you share one story about I think you were 14, right? When you were invited to come to New York and possibly go to Juilliard because you were very, very musically inclined. Like you had an incredible gift. You had an ear for music and both in your piano playing and then in your vocals. And what was that like going to New York City, you farm boy from South Carolina?
I wasn't exposed to anything. Phyllis and I went on a picnic, and she brought cheese and crackers.
This is many years ago.
Yes, this is when we're dating. She thought she brought cheese and crackers, and I knew what cheese was. We call it Velveeta, and so Phyllis brings out. I remember it was Swiss cheese and maybe another cheese or two. I don't know, but I was just aghast. Number one, at what this is, and number two, that she didn't even know what cheese was. Real cheese. I mean, the true cheese, Velveeta. And I had no exposure to so many things. So here I am, 14 years old. I go to New York City. I'm so overwhelmed, but I didn't want the guy that I was going to visit to know, because he was going to sponsor me at Juilliard. I didn't want him to know that I was overwhelmed. So I looked like an absolute jerk, butthead, because I'm just like, I'm unimpressed with everything. But in reality, I was overwhelmed with everything. But I didn't want him to know that I was just this country bumpkin. So I showed no emotion the whole weekend, which kind of pissed him off. Because he really, really showed me around. We actually went to a New Orleans Jazz basketball team. Have you heard of the Utah Jazz? Please say yes.
Yes.
Okay, good. Thank you. Well, the Utah Jazz moved to Utah from New Orleans. That's why they're called the Jazz. They used to be called the New Orleans Jazz. It was the New Orleans Jazz and the New York Knickerbockers. I bet we could track down their calendars and figure out exactly when that was.
Wow.
It'd be funny. But anyway.
Find out when you were at that ball game at 14.
Yeah. And I was mesmerized because I'd never seen anything. I mean, nothing like all these experiences that I was having.
So that was 1975, by the way, correct?
Yes.
You were in New York City, 1975, considering Juilliard.
Yeah, it may have already been 76 because I would have turned 15 September. So I don't know, somewhere in there. But yeah, it was a lot. But I learned so early on, again, and I can remember, and I thought it was a superpower. I can remember being left after school, and again, I don't know if it was 2 hours or 4 hours or 45 minutes, but I can remember being so cold, and I learned, sounds weird to say it out loud, but I learned how to pull up inside of my body so that I wouldn't feel cold because nobody ever told me anything. So I had no idea, was I going to be picked up at 3 o'clock? Or in 45 minutes or in an hour? I never knew, and when whoever showed up to finally pick me up, I wasn't allowed to ask, I wasn't allowed to complain for sure. And so I just accepted that, that's just the way it is. And so whenever I'd be waiting outside and it was cold, I learned how to, which again, it sounds weird, but, and I really did. I thought it was a superpower that, I can disassociate from my nerve endings, I guess, so that I don't feel cold anymore. And I think that set me up for a lifetime of just pulling within in so many different ways. And of course, didn't exactly help our connection because I just pulled within. And whenever I feel wounded by you, I'm not allowed to say anything. I'm not allowed to complain.
Right.
So I would just pull inside. And of course, we only did that for about a quarter of a century. But yeah, I mean, just so much effect from all of that. On and on and on.
All of that happened when you were 14. Even in that experience, you were stunt doubling the whole time. You were acting like you thought, which to me goes back to the movie of that whole anxiety, like you pretend like you're somebody else, right? You show up differently than who you've been. You show up differently. And you definitely did that in New York City. But you've told me this, like you were so afraid. Everything was overstimulating. Like you were terrified, but you didn't think you were allowed to tell anyone that. So this person who wanted to sponsor you at Juilliard, you never let on matter. I mean, I wouldn't be surprised that he didn't have a clue that actually you were terrified, but you were trying to act cool and trying to act indifferent and like, this is nothing, but your body was going crazy because your fear level was out the roof through every experience you had, even going to a ball game, which everyone would be like, this is a ball game. This should be super fun.
But Madison Square Garden.
Yeah, but you had
We
never
had second row seats.
been to anything
courtside.
like that. The capacity to even understand it. But you had already lived a lifetime of you don't tell anyone when you are maxed out. You don't tell anyone you're afraid. You don't tell anyone that you're uncomfortable or that this is not, this doesn't feel right. And so then you go back to Georgia and completely shut the door on that because you knew I can never go back there. Like I cannot say yes to Juilliard because that was terrifying. But you wouldn't have just said it that way, right? You would have, I mean, I don't know how you communicated no at the moment, but you're 16 when I meet you. And I see this guy who has it all together, like cool and debonair and, you know, just knows everything, which is the other thing we've talked about recently, that somehow you thought you had to know everything. And that was such a belief system. And so I just trusted you on everything. I see how that went into our marriage where I was always wrong. He was always right. He knew everything. I trusted that. So when he told me that you iron your bills and you put them in serial number order in your wallet, oh, that's the right way to do it. I just never knew that. And so you put all of these things into place, but what kind of pressure that was for you?
Right.
Because you had to continue to stunt double. You had to continue out of fear to lead us. And then I trusted you with everything, even our finances. And like, I didn't know how to partner with you because you knew it all. And it just, you know, I just think about, oh my gosh, like so much sad in all of that. Just so much pressure. And I was lost because I didn't know the real you. I didn't see the pain. I didn't understand any of it. I just saw this incredibly confident person, but you were struggling so much and I didn't know it. And you were in so much pain and I didn't know it. And you thought I would just, like your mom, when you were 5, would eventually figure out you were in pain and help you. But I didn't even know you were in pain, right? And I just trusted that you would handle it all. And you were falling apart inside. And again, we did not discover the connection codes until we were much, much older. And I just think, oh, that's why we want the world to get these tools. You got to know this stuff when you're young. You got to know how this plays out in your life, how this plays out in your parenting, how this plays out in your relationships. That's why we are so desperate to get this word out, because to live a lifetime where you think that you have to suffer in silence. No, you don't have to suffer in silence. You don't. And, you know, you think about the anxiety going back to the movie. It's like she was suffering in silence. She thought that she had to be cool. She thought she had to be the best. She thought she had to, you know, change her hair color. Like she thought she had to do all of this and she didn't. And that's when you go back to, I want to be authentic. That's scary. Oh my word, I get it. But I want to be authentic and I want to put it out there and I want to figure out what's happening with me so I can share it with people. And I want a community where I'm safe. I want a community that will allow me to be authentic. And I know many of you may be listening going, well, I don't have that community. Then we need a new community, people. You need friends. You don't have to have 100 of them, but you need 1. You need 2. You need a couple of people in your life where you are safe and you can be authentic and you can show up and you can say, I'm afraid and I'm sad and I'm lonely, and they will make space for your pain.
Okay. I have a lot of thoughts. One, I think you both need to do a core motion wheel around what we just talked about. So if we want to start there, or I have more that I can say. So Phyllis, you say more. Okay, great. What keeps firing for me is thinking about how these 2 identities, Glenn, with you just heard several moments, experiences is what we refer to them in now the last episode, that have made up those core beliefs within his body. And then we have Phyllis here, who she has her own stories that I've gotten to hear snippets and pieces to that have made up her own core beliefs within her body. And that these two things, y'all were 16 when you met. So much life happened before you ever even met and got married. So you talked about, Glenn, recently, where there's so much pain in marriage because nobody's warning you about what's coming. And that is because we have these inner things firing that we can't see. Because so many of us, they got cut off. The lid of it got cut off and shoved back, and we're not even in touch with those strands anymore. And now we're trying to come together and figure this thing out. But we've learned how to disassociate.
Yeah.
We've learned how to stuff our emotions. We've learned how to not show up authentically. And now two humans have to live life with each other.
Yeah.
How are they supposed to do that? Like, honestly.
Yeah.
And to not just like thrive, but even function. And so I really just keep picturing, as you're talking about, Glenn, like every human that is walking down the street, seeing their sense of self and that everybody has stories, every person that is listening right now, you may have something firing in your head of like, oh man, yeah, when I was 6, this happened. And when I was 10, this happened. And those things have formed your sense of self that are now affecting how you're showing up in your house. And I hate to break it to you, buddy, but your partner can't see it. They can't see it. So they keep stepping on your toes and they keep triggering you. And then you're exploding and you don't know why. And it's because there's a core belief that was given to you, that was put in there, that now keeps getting plucked over and over again. And is creating so much pain that you're just swirling. We're in a constant state of swirl.
Yeah. And the vast majority of relationships, not just partnered pairs, don't have the safety to share that.
Yeah.
One of the things we cover in the Foundations Masterclass is that the brain doesn't distinguish physical pain from emotional pain. It would kind of be cool if the body didn't, because if I could see Phyllis's arm bleeding, I would pay attention.
Yeah.
And instead, she feels pain. She feels wounded. She feels stabbed. She feels harmed. She doesn't say anything. I don't know. I can guess a percentage of the time. It's going to be a small percentage. Even if I'm guessing accurately 25% of the time, that means 3/4 of the time I'm completely missing it. So we just have to learn to say it. And most of us are completely illiterate in this language. And again, in my story, and I think it's probably the vast majority of people's stories, they learned early on. I sat with a couple last week, and he said my parents would say to me, just get over it. Get over it. Just get over it. And he can remember being slapped and spanked and, time out. And then he heard that. And again, did he hear that? Did his parents say it once or 1,000? I don't know. But he heard the message so many times, just get over it. And so now he tells his wife that. He goes, babe, you're just going to have to get over that. And it's really weird. It does not connect them. Whenever he says that.
Yeah.
And again, has he said that to her 3 times or 3,000? I don't know. But she hears that from him all the time. And we just learn how to disassociate.
Phyllis, this is a phrase that you used yesterday when we were talking about all the podcasts that we were planning. And we were talking about Glenn's story. And one of the phrases that you used was stunt doubling. When Glenn was in New York, he stunt doubled. He was trying to pretend to be something else, someone else. And we all have gotten really good at stunt doubling, really good. All of us have to some degree. And it looks different for everyone. But then what happens is we get married. And it's hard to stunt double 100% of the time, 7 days a week, 24 hours a day. And I actually was talking with somebody within the last 24 hours, and they're like, this is who my husband was when I married him, and this is who he is now. And he had gotten really good at stunt doubling. And that is just such a painful experience that our identities have become so out of touch or painful, the anxiety took over, these other emotions that took over that made our identity really spiky, that we don't even want to touch it anymore. We have to pretend that it's something else so we can even show up and for people to like us.
Yeah.
I'm going to say this quote, and y'all just bear with me, because this line, it's a Taylor Swift line, Taylor Swift lyrics that have been touching my soul for the last really year when she released a song. But it's from her song, and it says, "No one wanted to play with me when I was a little kid. So I've been scheming like a criminal ever since to make them love me and make it seem effortless. And this is the first time I felt the need to confess."
Wow.
And every time I hear those lyrics, I'm like, it is my core screaming those lyrics. And that is stunt doubling. We're scheming. We're trying to figure out to make people love us, because at our core, we need yes answers to, do I matter? Am I enough for you? And we are so desperate to get a yes to those questions that we will pretend to be someone else. We'll put on a mask. We will smile when we don't feel like smiling. We will show up as our stunt double because we are so desperate to feel identity and to feel a sense of self.
Yeah. And I just have to emphasize, we're not born that way. A 12-month-old never tries to be inauthentic. A 15-month-old, an 18-month-old. And I may have shared the story before, but one of our granddaughters is just precious. But when she was 4, she came running into the kitchen. Phyllis and I are there doing something, I don't know what. And they call Phyllis honey. She comes running in, she goes, "Honey, honey, honey." And, says it the way kids do, like 35 times. And finally, Phyllis tunes into her. And she goes, watch what I can do. And so Honey's paying attention. And suddenly this little girl realizes she doesn't have anything planned. But she knew that Honey would tune into her. And so and it was just amazing. I wish I had a video of it, because this little girl stands there for several seconds, pregnant, augmented seconds, and suddenly starts jumping on one foot. She goes, "Look, Honey, I can jump on one foot." And of course, Honey and Papa are like, "Oh my goodness, that's amazing. Wow." And then she looks at Honey, she goes, "Honey, I could teach you how to do this." And I'm just observing this as a behavioral scientist going, oh my gosh, this little girl is so stable in her identity. She knows that she matters. She knows that she's good enough. She knows that Honey is going to value her. And so this 4-year-old, and I guess at that point you're probably 60, stand there in the kitchen for whatever, 20 seconds, holding hands, hopping on one foot. And then the 4-year-old is off to her next adventure. And I'm like, wow, her identity is so stable, so secure. She knows Honey's going to be present for her, is going to be with her, is going to be tuned into her. That's what we all need. There's no birthday where we're going to sit this little girl down and go, "Happy birthday, sweetie. You're 8 now. Shut up. We don't want to hear from you anymore. And by the way, you don't matter anymore." There's no birthday where that's supposed to happen. 10, 15, 20, 25, 30. So we older kids, we older babies are supposed to experience it the exact same way. We just show up in our authentic self. And I have to say this real quick. And a shout out to Bridget Blood, by the way. If you don't know Bridget, find her. She's just amazing. But because she talks a lot about dating, and she and I talk a lot about dating. And there's a movie, if you've seen Hitch, I don't know if it's an awesome movie, but I like it because part of it is so horrible. But Hitch, played by Will Smith, his job, and he apparently gets paid a lot of money for it. And I know it's a movie, but this happens actually in real life. He gets paid a lot of money to teach guys how to stunt double, to teach guys, and he coaches them on how to be inauthentic. And his whole vocation is built on that. And of course, the story of the movie is that he eventually finds out, wait, what? You mean these women would actually like to see the authentic guy? And so he's literally coaching these guys on how to fake it to win this girl over. And we culturally believe that. And Phyllis and I have sat with numerous dating coaches, and that's what they do. They actually have an outline. They have a plan. The first date, you're this level of inauthentic. The second date, and you slowly, very slowly, begrudgingly, haltingly reveal a little bit of yourself. I'm like, are you kidding me? This is actually, it's almost like a field of science now, how you lie, how you present, and they'd never call it lying, but that's what it is. How you present it authentically, how you stunt double, how you fake it, and then slowly, ever so slowly, you stop or you fake it less. I'm like, that's such a disaster that never works.
That's a great
Core level
example. Yeah, core level anger. And I think that the more that we can tap into that core level anger for ourselves, the more we can get in tune with who we are. And so I want to talk about how to even get to that point. Like, what can we do to show up with our partners and see them better and to create a sense of self within yourself, but also show your partner like you matter and you are enough. And so one of the things that's firing for me is, well, obviously, this is the first thing I should say is the foundations course. Identity and sense of self, like those are our first two modules. Yeah. They are very important modules. That's why they're the first two modules. And there are experience assignments at the end of both of them. And we talk about your childhood. Mm-hmm. We talk about going back into like where ideas were formed. And I know we do it in late nights, talking about like where your sex and childhood. Mm-hmm. I think we do in foundations too. If not, we need to add that. But we talk a lot about going back into that childhood. And something that I'm realizing with Wes and I is me telling my story to him. You know, I shared when I did the core emotion wheel, like the last episode, that I'm unearthing a lot and I've been unearthing a lot. And I've got to talk about it. And I need a safe space where I can share that. And I'm so fortunate that my partner has gone through this connection codes process with me and so he is my safe space. But also my mother has been such a safe space. Sunday, I sat with her and I just wept and I shared with her things that were really hard for her to hear, super painful for her to hear. And she just held me in that. Wow. But being able to tell those stories, being able to like access that, letting Wes into my story a little more, he's probably like, oh, that makes a lot of sense of why you do that. That makes a lot of sense about why you show up the way you show up and respond to me this way or freak out whenever we have mold on bread or something like that.
And that explains that Tuesday afternoon 7 years ago when you reacted that way. Oh, it's not because you're a jerk. It's not because you're wretched. It's because of all the funky stuff that was happening for you in that moment. Oh, okay. I get it. I'm going to jump in there because that's the power of the ooh. The ooh is just an audible response, being present with somebody. We say go to Amazon.com, get an extra large box of oohs, so that you're just oohing them all the way through. I imagine, I talked to your mom, I imagine there were some difficult things for her to hear from you the other day, and she just oohed you all the way through, and she hears you. Did she experience those things you're referencing the same way you did? Well, no, but nobody's narrative is 100% accurate. That is what Terry experienced, and that is at least the memory of her experience. Okay, I'm just going to ooh the girl. I didn't experience it that way. That was actually a joy experience for me. It was a pain experience for you. Okay, you're a valid human being. You have the right to exist.
Yeah, which I want to add to that because this is so disconnecting for a lot of people. A lot of what I was processing with her was religious things that I'm struggling with, which is such a trigger for her. Such a my mom wants nothing more than for me to be like a solid Christian that has all of this faith. And that is so painful for your kid to be struggling in that area. And she could have spout out Bible verses. She could have said your identity is in Christ. She could have said all of those things, but she was so much more effective in oohing me and being safe for me. That made me feel so much safer and made me desire spirituality so much more because she didn't just shut me down. And we do that to each other all the time when we're talking about sensitive topics with each other. We're like, no, this is the right answer. Here's your answer for the test. And she didn't just give me the answer for the test. She let me figure it out by myself. And that was really powerful. But being able to ask each other and tell our stories to each other is so healing. It's painful.
Yeah.
I just watched you weep in sharing your stories, but it is so healing at the same time.
You've kind of opened the door on this because I've been sitting here thinking about how much we have missed in our church communities, and we have really fostered stunt doubling.
Yeah.
I mean, we teach it well, we demonstrate it well, we promote it well. And, if you're listening and you are in a leadership within a church community, please consider this and examine this, because we continue to foster the idea that you need to look good to show up in this space. For years now, one of my brothers, oh my gosh, decades, he has said, now, if you know any of my story, we grew up in Germany, we were missionaries, went over after World War II, started churches. We were the ones out there. Even as a child, I remember inviting people to church, handing them a pamphlet, telling them Jesus loves you. Like, it was such a part of our lives. Church was everything. It was everything. And to hear my brother, like, moving back to the States, that was a rude awakening for sure. But for my brother, he had long hair and a beard and a mustache and wore overalls or something. And he knew that was not acceptable for church, right? Now, I know that a lot of you are like, oh, well, we've come a long way from that. Now you can wear whatever you want. We've changed that. Okay, I'll give you that. That's true. Now we accept people showing up wearing whatever on Sunday mornings. Oh my goodness. That is a zero compared to this part where we have to show up as a stunt double and not tell our story. We can't talk about the real struggles. We can't say, man, I've had a really hard week and I've thought about suicide. We can't do that, because if we ever do, A, that becomes our name tag now. Yeah. B, we simply get given a scripture, or someone says, oh, let me put my hands on you and pray over you in this moment. And we walk away feeling empty. We walk away feeling judged. We don't feel like someone sat with us in our pain. They basically judged our pain and gave us the correct answer. They gave us the correct scripture. They thought, well, if I just pray, you just now confessed that you had an abortion. Let me just pray over you. And there's nothing wrong with prayer, but we need so much more so that we can continue to show up authentically. Yeah. And whatever it is, like, I've had a huge fight with my husband and I cussed at my kids. Where are we making space for that when we are together as a community? Where are we making space for that? Where are we allowed to show up? And I think that social media is cursing us even more, because on social media, we see pretty pictures. We see people put together having wonderful moments. That is all, so much of that is stunt doubling. Yeah. That's not really what's happening. Yeah. And it is how do we build a community where we can be authentic? And I know, Terry, you share with us at times where you're talking with, different pastors or church leaders trying to bring the connection codes in, and they're like, oh, we don't need this. We're a very authentic bunch of people. Yeah. And it's like, really?
Everybody's in small group. They know everything about each other.
Right. Mm-hmm. And you're like, really? Really? And it's like, and I think about that when we have certain retreats, especially for women, when we bring a group of women together and they'll go, oh, I can't share this anywhere. I cannot share this. And it's like, what kind of community are you in that you can't share your pain? Yeah. And it's like, I think for some listening, they don't even understand what we're saying right now, because they're so detached from that. They are so comfortable with their stunt double that they don't know how to find their authentic self.
Because what's the response supposed to be when somebody says, how are you doing? Blessed and highly favored.
There you go. I'm doing great. How about you? Yeah. I'm doing just fine. How about you?
I'm not saying that somebody's not blessed and highly favored. If that's your go-to response,
I have had a fantastic week.
Yeah, everything's perfect.
Well, what that is, it's a loss of sense of self. And so anytime we feel like we are stunt doubling, anytime we feel like we need to stunt double, someone is not necessarily doing it to us, but we are losing a sense of self. And that is so damaging for how we show up in the world. And that is one of the fastest way to dysregulate your brain. You want to get dysregulated, try to show up as somebody that you're not. And that is why when you've had a hard day at work and you've missed a deadline and you are fearful that you're going to lose your job and you walk into your home that night and your wife says, "How was work?" and you say it was fine, I guarantee you're probably going to get in a fight later. She's going to think the fight is about something totally different. She's going to think that you're upset with her because she, didn't do something correctly or she didn't have sex with you or whatever. Really, you stunt doubled from the time you walked into the door and she has no idea what's happening with you. And then flip that role around. We women are excellent at stunt doubling. And so the more we do that in our relationships, the more damage we're creating, that down the road, you're going to be trying to uncover it. And you're going to look at your partner and say, "I don't even know who you are." And you're right, you don't, because we've stunt doubled so well. And our identity are these beliefs that we've strung up from our experiences, and they are in us, whether we want them to be or not. You can ignore them, but let me tell you, they will make you sick. And for some people, they will kill you. Like they literally will. And you can either touch them and learn the tools to process it and learn the tools to show up so you can create safety for yourself, safety for your partner, or you can continue to ignore them and live in deep pain and deep loneliness. And that is so painful. And we know it's because your brain is dysregulated. We get that. Nobody wants to do that. And it is a hard jump into say, okay, I'm going to try this. Like I'm going to touch this thing that is painful for me.
Yeah. And that's the connection goes protocol. I don't want to be vulnerable until I know you're safe, but I'll never know you're safe until I'm vulnerable. And so we're at an impasse and it takes a risk. And it is. I want to tell you, if you've never done this, I say to couples, first time we sit with them, this will be the most challenging thing you ever do in your life. It'll also be the most rewarding, but it's terrifying. And to this day, for Phyllis to share with me, for me to share with Phyllis 100% authentic, vulnerably at the core all the time, there's lots of times that I feel fear with her. The difference is between us now and us 30 years ago, we just say it in the moment. Phyllis literally will walk in the room and she goes, "Babe, I need to talk to you, but I feel a bunch of fear about talking to you." And I go, "Woman, we've been together almost half a century. You stop it. You stop feeling." I don't really do that. I'm kidding. I just do the girl. I go, and it's the three phrases. I go, "Oh, wait, what's the fear? What am I missing there?" We process through it. And we do that in 30 seconds. A lot of people hear me say that and they're just like, yeah, right. That's not true. It's true. 30 seconds. And we just changed the world. We changed our world. We changed the world for people around us. It's a whole new world. It's really, really startling.
We're going to do the core emotion wheel. This is the 4-minute tool that Dr. Glenn and Phyllis have created that helps you to re-identify those core emotions that have been stuffed to the back of your brain so you can access them and live in this deep connection and authentically with each other.
Okay, I'll go first. I feel so much anger that I met a stunt double when I was 15.
Yeah.
And I feel a lot of sad because I believe I would have loved the authentic you. Feel so much hurt that you didn't trust me to show me that person. I feel joy that we have, through all this pain and through this journey, that we are in a place where we can feel so much joy that we have the tools that we can really be authentic with each other and show up in those spaces and in those stories. Feel guilt that I didn't know. I was clueless. I didn't understand. I didn't try to understand. I didn't try to read the books and learn. I just, put my head down and, feel shame in that. I think I've been challenged even in the last 5 years of my life to learn new things, to figure things out, to Google it, but I would say for many, many years, I just, no, did not want to do that. Fear, there is fear of really opening and walking into the room of that anger of that life that we created from our dating. Just, I think you're right. You've been telling me this, that there's anger, a lot of anger in there for me. We definitely touched it today, just realizing, man, all I saw and knew was a stunt double. It's been a lonely road for sure. Yeah. Lonely, lonely road. And a lot of that is my own story of just don't tell anyone when you're in pain. That was definitely my upbringing. Fake it till you make it, you know? So there's a lot of lonely in that for me.
Yeah. Wow. Thank you. For me, just so much pain. It's really bizarre to me. I mean, looking back to my childhood, I don't have memories of positives, of fun. I'm not saying there wasn't any. I just don't have memories of that. And so much sadness that's what you walked into, completely blind, clueless, having no idea. I always say that I was cute back then. So I was just this guy that you was like, oh my gosh, he's so cute. I just like him. He's fun. He's funny. So just so sad. And that, that's part of our passion. That's the anger that we have to change this culturally. It's unbelievable. Because this was not for a weekend or a month or a year. This was decades. This is a quarter of a century of our pain. And people don't have to live through that. And I'm so driven that we have to make a difference in this. There's so much fear for me, endless. I was fearful about everything. I had no idea. I was so fearful that I could never even see any of the fear. It's like, no, you just stop your crying or you'll get something to cry about. So just fake it. I love that. And I hate it, but fake it till you make it. I was just so convinced that if I present myself well enough to Phyllis, to, the guy in New York, it doesn't matter, whatever, you just fake it.
Yeah.
Because there was so much fear for me. Of course, there was so much shame. I didn't know what Swiss cheese was.
Yeah.
I had no idea that buildings could be built this tall, and that, I didn't know anything. And I was so flooded with shame all the time. And so my stunt double was just on overtime to protect me from people seeing me. And I knew, and I use air quotes, I knew that if you saw the real me, you would never like me. You would never have talked to me, and you would have left me at any point. Of course, I still experienced that at time. And I know intellectually that that's not true, but that deep, deep core belief that I'm not good enough, that if she ever really got to know me, and again, it's bizarre to me that's begun dissipating just the last few years. That I think, oh, well, we're approaching half a century, so maybe she does like me. So there's an outside chance, but so much guilt that I brought you through, so much just missing, endless missing, just clueless. It's a massive list of things. Certainly our wedding night, I never specifically verbalized it to you, but, allowing you to think that, oh, he's got that sex stuff, he knows. And I was clueless beyond measure, and the damage that led to. And I think what would have happened if, it was certainly before a wedding night, but if I just said, hey, listen, I'm clueless. We're going on an adventure together, and I don't, this whole, I really, really like you. I like your boobs, but I don't have a clue what to do here. So let's just adventure together and learn and grow. And I think, wow, what a gift that would have been for you, certainly for me too.
Yeah.
But if you had known that I was, in the true sense of the word, ignorant, I was just completely clueless and uneducated, and what an adventure it could have been for us. And instead it was so damaging. Ton of joy, again, so much pain and anger, and thinking, dang, it shouldn't have been like this.
Right.
Somebody should have shown up. There
Yeah.
were people available, and we had no voices in our life to help set us up for success. But so much joy that we have journeyed here. There's so much pain and just agony, brutal aspects of our history. But I'm glad that we are where we are now, and that we're so driven by this, that core level anger that says, oh, okay, we got to change this. And it's not that we dumped each other and went and found good spouses, because I would have done the same thing with anybody. I mean, I would have ended up in the same disaster with anybody. But the fact that we can, and I'm faith-based, I think there's redemption. I think the Spirit of God is involved. But with or without God, just that our story can be shifted, and that we actually can end up in a positive, not just positive, but spectacular place now. A lot of joy in that. So thank you for being patient with me for too absurdly long.
Well,
I'm glad.
If you're listening, I think my heart is really burning right now with the thought that if you have teenagers and they're beginning to date, or maybe they're older than teenagers, but that is so much of where you were so alone in it. You had already left home. Your dad was already dead. You had no one. And then my parents' reaction to you was so negative, especially my dad. Like, you were different and he didn't want different. And I mean, of course, in time, I learned that all my siblings had gone through the same thing. I was the youngest. So I was the last one to get married, but my dad rejected all of the spouses that my siblings chose. But oh my word, if my dad had simply walked with us instead of, like, he forced me to choose at 17. He gave me a Saturday night lecture, and it's either pack up all your stuff and be gone by the time I get home from church, or Glenn is out of your life forever. And so I packed up all my things and I left home at 17. And so we were so alone and trying to figure out everything. And I just think, if you're listening, and don't disconnect from your kids, they need you. They may be making choices you don't approve of. They may be choosing people you don't like.
Yeah.
But when you think about this, and you said that at some point, Tira, about it wasn't just the word compassion, it was empathy. Just the idea that if we could have empathy, if we could even want to know people's stories, like, instead of just judging them in the moment, like, oh, well, they're just weird, I don't like them, to go, wait, how did they get here?
Yeah.
Let me hear their story. If my dad had ever cared enough to say to Glenn, hey, let's go for a walk, I would love to know your story. There was no curiosity. There was just judgment. And it's like, oh my word, if you had had anyone along the way say, let me walk through life with you. And it's not that you didn't have a few touch points, a few people who gave you a place to sleep. Like, I am thankful for those people when you were homeless. I'm thankful for people who took you in. But it's like, they may have given you a place to sleep, but I don't know that they ever really heard your story. I don't know that they ever gave you the safety you needed to process all of your life, right? And so if you're listening, and maybe it's not even that you have kids that need you. Maybe it's you have a coworker that needs you. Maybe if you just have a friend, a neighbor, get to know their story. Like, realize that their sense of self came from their experiences, came from somewhere. Slow down enough to make a safe space for people. If you're in a small group, oh my word, come on, guys. Let's hear our stories. Let's hear the painful parts of our lives.
Yeah. This just occurred to me, maybe we'll look back years from now and say it was brilliant, or it may just annoy Tira, I don't know. But it just occurred to me, in your spare time with the connection codes, we need to have a dating coach wing of this. And it's interesting, we have teenage grandchildren now, and we adore all of them, and we're very, very close with all of them. Their parents, our children, spend a fortune on getting them coaches
Yeah.
in hockey, in football, in whatever they're playing, which is great. I'm totally supportive of that. Oh my gosh, these kids need life coaching. They need dating coaching.
Wow.
We send our kids out there to date and go, well, wear a condom and be home by midnight or whatever.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking, oh my gosh, for everything we spend on these sports coaches, dang, we need dating coaches for these teenagers, for these young people. And I would suggest to you that's a bit more valuable than, because the vast majority of them are not going to play professional sports. So it's not like it's an investment for a payoff in the future. I forget the percentage is tiny. I think it's less than 1% are actually going to make money at this. So I guarantee you them playing this sport successfully will not be a fraction as valuable as how they end up connecting, partnering in relationships in the future.
Yeah, I would say that's true for any part of your relationship.
Yeah.
Like the relationship you already have. You're already married and you're like, oh gosh, I'm doubling sometimes.
Yep.
I don't know whom I am. I don't know who my partner is. We are constantly losing identity, losing sense of self with each other. We are living in pain, but you're not willing to invest to get out of that pain. It actually blows my mind. Like it really does. This is every single day of your life. Every day of your life.
Yep.
And I really just want to like bang my head into the wall, because at that point I feel anger at you, and that's not fair to you. You have things that are happening in your body, but there are ways you don't have to live in this pain, and you shouldn't. And your partner shouldn't have to either.
Yeah,
and
but
so
we've culturally said that, whatever, spending money. I mean, I talked to a couple this morning. They're going to spend a fortune on their family's vacation, which is great. I'm not against that in and of itself. And they said, well, we really can't afford to do sessions very often. And I'm like, what? And I don't know what they're going to spend. But I think it's a big number that they're going to spend on this huge. And again, if you can afford it, great, have at it. But I'm like, that vacation won't solve anything for you. I promise you. You go there, you spend this fortune, you come home, you're going to be the exact same way. Maybe a little tanner, I'm not sure. But that's it. You spend the money and get better as a person. I love, and I don't know him at all, but Grant Cardone says all your money needs to go into investing in yourself, because you are what are going to, pay off in the future. And most people, and I think that's a fairly new concept, but literally just the last few years where people have been, I need to invest in myself as a human, then I will be successful. Instead, we buy a lemonade stand or whatever, and we spend a fortune on that, which is fine if it's a good lemonade stand, but we just are so, what would that be called, deprioritized or something as far as what is really, really valuable in life.
Wow.
Well, in the meantime, one, yes, invest in yourself, do the foundations course, take action, and also create safe space for yourself. I think that's the first step of finding out what is happening with me. Okay, something just happened and I'm feeling really triggered. Okay, what's happening in my core? Where did this come back from? Oh, that's a message I heard a lot as a kid. That's a belief that I have in myself. What is this trying to tell me? Okay, I have shame around it. Process what's happening in your body. And then connect with your partner. Ask them what's happening for you. See each other, and then recognize that every time you walk into a room with each other, there is so much happening underneath that surface that you can't see. And when we can realize that, it creates compassion and empathy. And just an understanding of, oh, okay, so your reaction actually has nothing to do with me. That has to do with you and your dad, you and your ex-girlfriend. Oh, okay, we need to process that for you. Just because I said the thing that triggers you doesn't actually mean that I am in the wrong. I just need to support you in figuring out what's happening. We take everything as such an accusation because our own identity is so messed up. And so take time, get curious about each other, find out what's happening underneath the surface. And thank you so much for being on this journey with us. Dr. Glenn and Phyllis say this all the time, that they are pilgrims on this journey. They are doing this work so the rest of us, me included, can benefit from it. And they are steps ahead of us. And so we are looking at that and we can see the power of what this can do. So thank you for being here, being a part of this community.
Yeah.
I hope you will share these 3 episodes. I think these 3 episodes are so powerful. You can tell we haven't been with each other in a month because all of us are like over here crying with each other. This is what we're like in business meetings too.
Sure.
But thank you. Share these episodes. And we do all of this because
you need this.
You deserve this. So let's do this.
Let's do this.